Welcome back to Living Grounded. You're here with Lila and Tim,
Hello.
and we're currently walking through the highlights of the Bible together. We've covered about 5 books of the Bible in 10 episodes. So today it's time for Joshua.
Here we go. We're out of the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. That's all that means. And we're at the moment where the baton has been passed from Moses. Moses has led God's people over the last kind of 4 books, Exodus to Deuteronomy. He's been leading God's people out of Egypt, slavery in Egypt, and to the very edge of what the Bible calls the Promised Land, or what God calls the Promised Land, the place that he's taking Israel.
Almost there.
Almost there. So he's passed the baton to a guy called Joshua, who's going to lead God's people into the next stage. He'll take them into the Promised Land. And, spare a thought for Joshua. It's a pretty daunting task. The land that God has promised to Israel is not uninhabited. It's full of a violent, warlike people. There's reports of giants, so think Goliath if you're familiar with that. But not just one Goliath, like many Goliaths is the picture. And that's just the enemies. The more daunting task is keeping Israel obedient to the covenant that they made with God. It's that saying, herding cats is not it must feel like something like that to Joshua, because over the past 40 years they have really shown themselves to be quite a rebellious people with very short memories, very little faith in the God who rescued them from Egypt. And Joshua must feel like a small skinny guy in the ring with not one but 2 kind of heavyweight boxers against him. But Joshua has reason to feel strong. Chapter 1 verse 9, this is said once or twice, but God says to him, just as I was with Moses, I will be with you. Be strong and courageous. And those words are still taught today to many a kids' church lesson. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. The Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. And so begins the campaign under Joshua to conquer the Promised Land. And it begins with a real bang. They send spies into the first kind of major fortified city, which is a place called Jericho. It's got high walls. It's got significant fortifications. If you go online and look at kind of what the city probably looked like, it's a daunting task to take it, to conquer it. But these spies are there, so sends in spies first, and they meet a woman called Rahab, who is a prostitute, and she actually hides the spies from the authorities in Jericho because it turns out she's a believer in the Lord. She's heard about the Lord's work, and she wants to be on the right side of what's about to happen. She makes the spies promise that when they take Jericho, they're going to spare her and her family, which does happen. After hearing the report of the spies come back from hiding in Rahab's house. They make it back. They report to Joshua and the army, and they then cross the whole army then crosses the Jordan River. It's kind of this powerful symbolic moment. The Jordan River is kind of the boundary line to the Promised Land. And God signifies that moment with a reminder of the parting of the Red Sea by kind of doing the same thing at the Jordan. So Israel will pass through the Jordan into the Promised Land, kind of with a new beginning as a people. And then they arrive at Jericho. And God says to Joshua through an angel who is the commander of the Lord's army, he tells them to do something pretty bizarre. Rather than, siege weapons and ladders and all this sort of stuff, he says, march around the city once every day for 6 days and make a bunch of noise. Trumpets, all this sort of stuff. Put the Ark of the Covenant in front of you, all these sorts of bits. But then on the 7th day, go and do it one more time, but do it armed and ready. You can just imagine what the people on the walls of Jericho must be thinking. Like, who are these, come to sing us to death or something like that. But Israel does what God says, And then on the seventh day, as they're marching around the city, as the Ark of the Covenant goes before them, you remember that wooden box? It's got the 10 Commandments inside and so on. It's got the mercy seat, but it's kind of the symbol of God's presence. God is with his people. And as they blow their trumpets and make their war cries, the wall collapses under the power of God. The warriors of Israel charging, everything is destroyed. Except for one family, of course.
Who could that be?
Yeah. All who belong and find refuge in the house of Rahab are saved from destruction.
Cool.
Yeah, it's kind of this wonderful picture of God's grace, of when destruction comes, those who trust in him will be saved. They'll be protected. And it's really interesting in just as a little side thing. This two things very quickly on this that are fascinating. Rahab, this is a Canaanite prostitute, okay? She actually becomes the the great-grandmother of King David, which makes her the many more times great-grandmother of Jesus. Yeah. You can check that out in Matthew chapter 1. He deliberately includes it in there. But secondly, this story of Jericho was one that was kind of long dismissed by historians and archaeologists. Never happened. Because there was no evidence of a city like Jericho in the period of Joshua. However, more recently, excavations at the site of Jericho have found a city wall that essentially fell down. That
doesn't happen.
That unexplainably something happened to. Evidence of a city burned by fire, which Joshua records that they destroyed the city. And strangely, you've also got containers of like grain, which you don't expect to see because normally they're taken or plundered. And but this makes sense because Israel was actually forbidden from taking anything except for bronze, silver, and gold in the city. So it's just a fascinating thing. And even one other little piece I'll mention, it seems like not all the city walls fell down. Now, why is that important? Well, Rahab's house was actually a part of the city wall. And so it seems like some of the city walls stood standing. So, amazing.
And was Jericho basically the entry to the promised land?
Jericho is kind of like you don't, when you go and conquer a place, you can't leave fortresses behind you. It's like the first fortresses you kind of enter, the way they've entered from the promised land. So archaeology seems to back up the biblical story. It's really, really interesting thing. Not surprising though. So Joshua starts with a real bang. You've got this Jericho moment. After this, though, it's kind of similar to what comes before. Not all of Israel is obedient in the destruction of Jericho, which they find out because on their next battle, they send about 3,000 against this city called Ai, and they get smashed. Israel gets smashed. And so, hang on, if God was with us, why are we losing? And it turns out that one guy, Achan, actually disobeyed the Lord and grabbed some of the loot from the city, and he's been hiding it. Now, for his sin, Achan is stoned to death, and it's a reminder again of the covenant. Where they are obedient to God's words, God will bless them and keep them. But when they don't trust God's word, bad things happen. And so it is here. God is with Israel, but they must remain faithful. The remainder of Joshua, though, after this moment, is kind of taken up with more and more conquests of the land, dividing up their new territory into states according to each of the tribes of Israel. And as we get to the end of the book, Joshua is an old man. It's another kind of taking stock moment. Israel has conquered most of the promised land. He reminds them of their covenant with God. That God has been faithful to his promises. He's given them the land. But Israel, will you be faithful to yours? Remember, he says, be obedient to the law. And this is particularly important for what's to come. Joshua reminds them, don't ally yourselves with the survivors of the Canaanite nations. Don't intermarry with them.
Well,
they are going to become traps and snares to you. Yeah. They will cause you to turn away from God, and you'll perish from the good land that God has given you. So hear the kind of underlying implication. They haven't destroyed all the Canaanites like they were commanded to.
Mm-hmm.
There is a remnant that remains. You could say a forbidden fruit that is still in the garden. And so Joshua kind of leaves us with this question of, will Israel resist the temptation to make alliances, intermarry with the people who remain? Will they take them as slaves or allies? That's kind of where Joshua ends with that question. Yeah.
How does Joshua point us to Jesus?
Well, it's in the name. We might know that Jesus means God saves, or Yahweh is salvation, if you want the strict literal sense. But Jesus is an English translation of the Hebrew name Yeshua. But Yeshua is actually also Joshua. If you Jesus is the more literal English. Jesus is the more natural English translation, but Joshua is another translation that you can do. Jesus is Joshua, and that's not a coincidence. Jesus is meant to remind you of Joshua. What does Joshua do? Well, he's strong and courageous. He leads God's people into the promised land. He leads them into the blessings of God. Jesus too will be strong and courageous, leading God's people not into the promised land of Canaan, but of the new creation, the place where God's blessings will be even greater than grapes the size of your head. It's a land of milk and honey and other good things. It's a land of all of God's blessings, where God will dwell with his people, not in a temple or a tent, but everywhere that the light touches. Only Jesus doesn't conquer by killing his enemies. He conquers by allowing himself to be killed. He's slain on behalf of human wickedness so that God's people, who will always fail to uphold their side of the covenant, can still enjoy God's blessings. All they need to do is follow the greater and true Joshua.
So interesting how it all ties back to Jesus. How does that help us to live grounded today?
Well, I think 2 Corinthians 6, the Apostle Paul famously said, you want to read it for us?
Yeah. Do not be yoked together with unbelievers, for what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? Or what fellowship can light have with darkness?
That's 2 Corinthians 6:14, sorry. Joshua reminds Israel of God's commands. Do not intermarry or mix with the Canaanites. Today we would say that's racist, but it's not about their race. It's about their religion. It's a reality that God knows. Following him, following Jesus today, isn't like a hobby. It's not a philosophy of life even. It is a total reorientation of your direction in life. It is a reorientation of your identity, your purpose, every part of yourself. When you choose to, say, marry a non-Christian, for instance, you are two people on different paths. And that makes it extremely difficult to follow Jesus faithfully. You don't even need for the husband-wife partner to be anti-Christian. It's not about that. They don't even need to be anti-church. They could be somewhat supportive, which I've met people who are. But there is a difference between being married to someone who daily urges you, encourages you, prays for you, helps you to walk on the path of following Jesus, versus someone who may be supportive, generally speaking, but isn't going to do those things. You're talking about something that is already very hard. Following Jesus is very hard in our world. You're talking about making it really hard, much more hard. We need to be careful. We don't live in heaven yet. We live in a world that is following the prince of the power of the air. That's the name the New Testament gives Satan. There is no neutral ground here. And it may not look like people are doing that, but it really is kind of one or the other. So we need to be careful. We need to be careful about the depth of our relationships with non-Christians. Now, sometimes you can't choose. Maybe you became a Christian when and you were already married to someone who hasn't become a Christian. Okay. Bible says, oh no, don't get divorced, but it will be hard. there is a reality. We pray they would be saved. Other pieces of choices. I think it should at least cause you to wrestle with going into business with a non-Christian. I'm not saying that you absolutely can't. I think it should cause you to really wrestle with that, because in my experience, it often will make that process very difficult. So, even let me give you another space. Friendships. Should I keep hanging out with friends that keep pulling me into sinful behaviors? Now, this is complicated, obviously, because we want to see our friends, we want to see our family, we want to see people won to Jesus. But what you want to wrestle with is, am I being pulled into their world, or are they being pulled into my world? That's really the question. None of this is about thinking that we're better than a non-Christian. It's about realizing that following Jesus faithfully is hard, and that certain types of relationships in the world will actually pull us away from following Jesus rather than drawing closer to him. All of this requires wisdom. We want to keep reaching out to non-Christians with good news, but we need to be on our guard. Here's the reality. No human relationship is worth losing Jesus for. No pleasure now is worth missing out on the eternal pleasures of God's blessings in the promised land we call heaven, or the new creation. That's the big principle.
Good. That's it for Joshua.
Okay.
Where are we going to go next week?
Yeah, things start getting real crazy with the judges. So, yeah, we might even end up 2 episodes of the judges. We'll see. Yeah.
Clean. See you next week. Bye.
Ciao.